Today, we're diving into a story of just incredible ambition. It's a high-stakes energy strategy from a nation that's facing what looks like, well, an impossible set of problems. This isn't just about changing light bulbs, it's about engineering a future that honestly shouldn't even be possible on paper. Welcome to Singapore's Power Play.
And this right here, this is the central question. It's the riddle at the very heart of this story. I mean, think about it. Singapore is a massive global hub for finance, for shipping, for industry. It needs a ton of energy. But how do you fuel that kind of ambition when you have basically zero natural resources of your own? How do you go green when you have no space for things like giant wind or solar farms? This challenge, it drives every single decision we're about to unpack.
To really get your head around the scale of the problem, you have to start with this number, just over 700 square kilometers. That is it. This is not a country with huge open spaces for solar arrays or big mountain ranges for hydropower. Every single square meter is precious. It's fought over. This one number basically dictates their entire strategy, forcing Singapore to think way, way beyond its own borders. And here you have it, the nation's critical dependency. You could call it its Achilles heel. A truly staggering 95% of Singapore's electricity comes from just one source, imported natural gas. Now sure, it's cleaner than coal, but relying this heavily on one thing creates huge vulnerabilities for energy security and for climate action. This is the starting line. This is where the whole radical transformation has to begin.
And this is exactly why the power sector is ground zero for Singapore's climate goals. It's the single biggest source of the nation's carbon emissions, making up a massive 40%. So, if you want to meet any serious climate target, if you want to get to net zero by 2050, you have got to solve this puzzle first. The entire National Green Plan really hinges on taming this one beast.
All right, so now that we know what's at stake, here's the roadmap for our story. We're going to start by really digging into what we're calling an impossible problem. Then we'll unpack the master plan they've designed to solve it, the 4 switches. After that, we'll look at their most ambitious move, building a regional supergrid, before we come back home to see how they're rewiring the country from the inside out. We'll wrap up by looking at their long-term bets on future fuels and what this all could look like by 2035.
So let's start with the central conflict of this whole narrative. This is the point where Singapore's massive global ambitions, its economic power, smash right up against the hard reality of its geography and, of course, the urgent need to deal with climate change.
You know, what's so fascinating here is this idea of the dual mandate. See, Singapore isn't just trying to keep the lights on for its people. It has to power one of the busiest ports in the world, a huge petrochemical hub, a thriving industrial sector. You get the idea. So any climate plan has to be weighed against the absolute need to stay economically competitive. And that explains a very pragmatic and sometimes controversial approach of going green while also beefing up their role as a global hub for liquefied natural gas. It's a really delicate, high-wire act.
And this, of course, brings us to the pressure from the outside. While Singapore sees its plan as realistic, global watchdogs like the Climate Action Tracker have called its targets highly insufficient. And that's mainly because its 2030 goals are still way off a 1.5-degree path. So this isn't just an internal challenge, the whole world is watching. And that verdict just highlights the huge gap between where they are now and where they need to be. The pressure to get this right is just immense.
So how do you even begin to solve an impossible problem? Well, you create a master plan. And this isn't just some policy document. It's a meticulously engineered strategy with multiple parts, all designed for national survival and transformation in a world that's getting serious about carbon.
And this right here, it's a brilliant way to understand their approach. It's called the 4 switches. Think of it like an investment portfolio. First, you've got natural gas. That's your anchor, keeping things stable during the transition. Second, you squeeze out every single drop of solar you possibly can. It's the only real renewable they have at home. Third, and this is the absolute game changer, you reach beyond your borders with regional grids. And fourth, you make some smart, strategic bets on the future with things like hydrogen. Each switch has a job to do, and they're all designed to work together over the next few decades.
And here's where it's all headed. This chart shows you what happens when you start flipping those switches. By 2035, look at this. Low-carbon electricity imports could make up a massive 30% of the mix. Solar is going to grow a lot, and natural gas, it drops to about 50%. So the key takeaway here is that gas doesn't just vanish. Its job fundamentally changes. It goes from being the main source of power to being the backup, the thing that keeps the grid stable when the sun's not out or the imports dip.
Okay, so this brings us to that third switch, which is without a doubt the most audacious, the most critical, and the most geopolitically tricky part of the whole strategy. With almost no options at home, Singapore is looking outward. They're trying to build a huge network to bring clean power in from their neighbors.
And the sheer scale of this ambition is all wrapped up in this one number: 6 gigawatts. That's the target for low-carbon electricity imports by 2035. To give you some perspective, that's enough juice to power millions of homes. It's going to meet a full 30% of the entire country's needs. This is not a small pilot project. This is a fundamental re-engineering of how the country gets its power.
Now, what's really fascinating about this slide is the story that it tells. This is not about just relying on one neighbor. No, this is a carefully built portfolio of geopolitical partnerships. You've got Indonesia as the cornerstone, with a huge 3.4 gigawatts planned, all backed by strong government deals. Then there's the absolutely breathtaking Sun Cable project from Australia, 1.75 gigawatts through a 4,300-kilometer subsea cable. I mean, wow. Add in major projects from Vietnam and Cambodia, and you see the strategy crystal clear: diversification. Even that smaller project, the LTMS PIP, is vital. It's the test case for a much bigger, fully integrated ASEAN power grid someday.
But of course, a strategy this grand comes with a grand risk. And this quote really hits the nail on the head. See, Singapore is used to managing its energy risk with flexible seaborne trade. If a gas supplier has an issue, you just reroute a tanker from somewhere else. But a 4,000-kilometer subsea cable? That's a fixed, physical thing. It's a lifeline that can get damaged or, worse, become a pawn in a political game. This completely changes the country's energy security playbook, from managing fluid trade to defending static, critical infrastructure.
So for this huge external strategy to have any chance of working, the grid back home has to be ready for it. And that brings us to the home front, where Singapore is in the middle of a massive, super complex project to rewire its own national core, just so it can handle this new energy reality.
So how does one of the most crowded countries in the world also become one of the most solar-dense? Well, through relentless, frankly, brilliant innovation. They've got a target of at least 2 gigawatts peak of solar by 2030. And they're doing it by plastering solar panels all over the roofs of their famous public housing blocks. And where they run out of land, they use water, building some of the world's biggest floating solar farms on their reservoirs. Literally every available surface is being turned into a mini power plant.
Okay, so as the grid gets more, let's say, wobbly with all these renewables and imports, stability becomes everything. And that's where Singapore Gas Co. comes in. This is a brand new, government-owned company, and its whole job is to be the steady hand on the wheel. By centralizing all the natural gas buying, they can get better deals, better long-term contracts, and make sure there's always a stable fuel source ready to jump in and back everything up. It is a classic Singaporean move: use centralized control to manage risk during a huge period of change.
So how do you actually force all this change to happen? You use a powerful combination of a stick and a carrot. The stick is one of the toughest carbon taxes in Asia, and it's set to climb to a really significant $50 to $80 per ton by 2030. That makes pumping out carbon super expensive. The carrot is the $5 billion Future Energy Fund. This money is specifically there to de-risk the huge investments needed for things like those subsea cables or new hydrogen terminals. It basically encourages private companies to build the stuff that the carbon tax is demanding. It's just a beautifully synchronized policy machine. And this is where the grid gets seriously intelligent. A virtual power plant, or VPP, isn't a physical building. It's a smart, digital system. What it does is link together thousands of little energy sources, rooftop solar panels, batteries in buildings, even EV chargers, and lets the grid operator control them all as if they were one single, giant, flexible power plant. This is huge. It turns passive consumers into active players that can help balance the grid in real time.
And the potential here is just enormous. Singapore has figured out that there's over 400 megawatts of untapped flexibility just sitting there in its system. It's hidden in things like commercial air conditioning systems or industrial machines that can be turned down for a few minutes. VPPs and smart grid tech are the keys to unlocking this huge, invisible reservoir of stability, which means you don't have to build as many expensive physical power plants.
Right, we're now at the final piece of the puzzle. To get from a mostly green grid in 2035 to true net zero by 2050, Singapore has to make some high-risk, high-reward bets on the technologies that are going to define the future of energy.
Now, this timeline is so important. because it's all about managing expectations. Things like hydrogen and carbon capture are not quick fixes. The plan is to lay the groundwork right now. The first power plant that's ready for hydrogen is coming online as early as 2027. By 2030, the carbon capture focuses on the industrial hub at Jurong Island. The power grid itself probably won't plug into that big CCUS system until the mid-2030s. See? It's a very deliberate, step-by-step plan to test out these new technologies before they bet the entire country on them.
And this is just a perfect illustration of their first-mover strategy. Instead of just waiting around for technologies to be perfect, they launch what they call Pathfinder projects. A great example is their plan for a power plant that burns ammonia directly. Ammonia is a promising low-carbon fuel, a way to transport hydrogen. By building this pilot plant, Singapore is testing it not just for its own power grid, but also for refueling all the thousands of ships that come through its port. It's a brilliant strategic move to test the tech and build the supply chains for two vital sectors at the exact same time.
So, with all these pieces moving, the super grid, the smart grid at home, the bets on future fuels, what does it all add up to? If this whole plan actually works, what will Singapore's energy world look like in 2035? Let's check out some expert predictions.
Okay, the first prediction is a direct result of that big reach outwards. The huge vulnerability of those subsea power cables is going to elevate them from just being commercial projects to being strategic national assets. What that means is the deals governing them will have to be more than just trade agreements. We're talking full-blown multilateral security pacts with joint monitoring and protection. Energy security will basically become inseparable from national security.
Prediction number 2 really clarifies the future role of natural gas. So, while its share of the total energy mix drops, its importance for reliability will stay just as high, if not higher. Yeah, they'll start blending in hydrogen, but the physical gas power plants will still provide most of the firm, on-demand power. They'll be the guardians of the grid, the essential backup that can fire up in seconds to balance out the ups and downs of solar and imports.
The third prediction shows how policy is going to reshape the entire industrial landscape. That carbon tax, which keeps going up and up, is going to make it just too expensive for the least efficient industrial plants to even operate. This is probably going to force a wave of consolidation, creating bigger, more efficient companies. And here's why that matters. That concentration of emissions in one place is exactly what you need to create the scale to make that massive Jurong Island carbon capture project work and hit its 2030 target.
And the final prediction sees Singapore turning its unique problem into a global advantage, because they're being forced to solve this incredibly complex problem of managing a dense, digital, renewably powered city grid. Singapore is on track to become the world's #1 benchmark for how to do it. By 2035, it's predicted they won't just be running this advanced grid. They'll be exporting the rulebooks, the software, and the know-how to other huge cities all around the world that are trying to do the same thing.
So, in the end, Singapore's strategy is just an incredible high-wire act. It's a massive bet on technology that isn't fully proven yet, on complex financial deals, and maybe most importantly, on stable, long-term diplomacy with its neighbors. The question that's left is a really profound one. Will this incredibly audacious plan become the blueprint that other cities with no resources can follow into a green future? Or will it end up as a cautionary tale of ambition crashing into reality? The next decade is going to give us the answer.